Welcome back to the Pro Football Historian channel. I'm your host, Flynn Given, and today we are going to be talking about the Chicago Bears. Obviously, they had an up and down season, having multiple quarterbacks play, from Andy Dalton, Nick Foles, and obviously Justin Fields, their first round pick that they traded up for. The team went 6-11 after making the playoffs the year before. So let's go through their season right now. They opened the season against ultimately would have been is now the Super Bowl champions. And didn't go too well, very early in the game. So after those 67-yard touchdown of Van Jefferson, uh, the Bears had some shots. I know they had, Andy Dalton interception, which possibly they could have got some points and made it more of a game. They ran the ball pretty well against the Rams. But other than that, and you saw a little bit of Justin Fields. But ultimately wasn't great. And their defense, which is the team needed to lean on this year, was up and down. Khalil Mack didn't play a ton. Akeem Hicks was injured. So, we'll talk about the season, obviously, but going in the next year, they just have to get younger, and obviously they need to probably build more offensively, but they got a defensive coach in Matt Eberflus. So it's really curious how they're going to build this team. Have an offensive mind before Matt Nagy. Now they're moving away from that. I know a lot of fans and a lot of people watched the Bears offense, weren't really excited about it, and I don't think they put their quarterback in the best spot either. Especially Justin Fields, they didn't really build the offense around him, and maybe it's because they thought they were going to sit him all year. I don't know. Usually in this league, you don't sit the rookie quarterback that went in the first round. The entire first year. It's just how the NFL is. And then their next week was against another Super Bowl team, the AFC champion Bengals. They ultimately won this game. This is known for the game that Joe Burrow threw 3 picks on 3 consecutive passes. Really was an ugly game both ways, especially the Andy Dalton revenge show. He ultimately gets hurt. Justin Fields comes in, doesn't play too well. I think he throws an interception to Logan Wilson. We're going to look. It was Logan Wilson. And then, their offense couldn't do much and allowed the Bengals to kind of slowly come back. But, 5 sacks. Joe Burrow just, they just couldn't do a lot offensively. They had some explosive plays in there, like the Jamar Chase play. And, he only had 2 catches the entire game, Chase. One was a touchdown, the 42-yarder, I believe. T. Higgins also had a touchdown. But, Bears harassed him. The defense looked pretty good this game. I know someone was a little fluky pressure that, ultimately resulted in an interception on a tip pass or something, but they made the plays they need to. Roquan Smith obviously scored a defensive touchdown, I believe. So, they played their game. And then the next week, played the Browns. Very ugly game offensively. Can't really blame the defense here, but the offense only had 2 field goals, right? And the stats were really bad. I'm just going to look. I know there's a lot of sacks in here. So, basically, 1 total yard of passing. I thought it was negative, but if you look at the sack yardage with a 6 for 20 for 68-yard day for Justin Fields, then they had a little bit of rushing yards, but really bad. Browns were a pretty talented team this year. They just ultimately, Baker Mayfield injury and all that. Ultimately, they couldn't even have a winning season. But the sacks really came in bunches for the Browns. Myles Garrett had 4.5. You had Clowney with 2. Safety Rodney Harrison 1, and a bunch of half sacks in there. It's just really bad day for the Bears. I think you could say this is probably the low point, at least for the offense. They then played the Detroit Lions. Ultimately, this is the team that had the worst record in the league. And in both games, they Narrowly came out with a victory. This one, the second matchup was obviously a little bit closer, which we'll discuss. But, there was just miscues by the Lions. Like Jared Goff free for almost 2 turnovers from that standpoint. This was, Fields is getting a little bit better. Still wasn't great, but they ran the ball really well, the Bears, and against the kind of team the Lions have, they're pretty good run stopping defensive tackle. Even the defensive ends are pretty good against the run. So to be able to run like that, pretty good for the Bears. And then the following week, they play the Raiders, and another. This is John Gruden's last game, I believe, and I don't really honestly remember a ton from this game other than Justin Fields played his best game up to this point. Andy Dalton threw a pass in there, but again, more running. Khalil Herbert finally comes out. I think he was a late round pick. Could be wrong if he was a 6th round, maybe a 7th rounder, but either way, very late round pick. I thought maybe just going to be a special teams player, but Dave Montgomery hurt. They had to rely on Herbert, and he really played pretty well, even though they expected Damon Williams to be the guy if Montgomery was hurt or the split time with him, but it didn't turn out that way, and they really slowed down this offense. Maybe the Raiders just played bad because all the news was coming out about the Gruden situation. Really, it was the Washington football team situation, but the news, at least on John Gruden, came out before this game. Either way, the Bears are 3-2 at this point. They go to Green Bay, played fairly well. Just some bad interception by Herbert. Not Herbert. Justin Fields, and really the difference in the game. And then Aaron Rodgers that rushing touchdown, which is probably the most memorable part about this game. Very late in the game, they did sack Rodgers 3 times, which if you look at the last 2 years, Rodgers hasn't been sacked a ton. They usually actually come in bunches. Like the playoff game against the Bucks 2 years ago, 5 sacks. This year's playoff game against 49ers, 5 sacks. And then not a lot else, from the sack standpoint. I'm going to say maybe 20 times he's been sacked this year, and then the year before was less than that. So, and then there was a Panthers game, even a Saturday game in 2020 that he got sacked like 4 or 5 times. So again, Bears got pressure, and they pressured the Bengals with a bad offensive line, but even a good offensive line like the Packers, they had success getting pressure on Rodgers. Still, Rodgers played pretty well, and they consistently had a pretty good run game, which you can understand. Everyone's trying to stop the passing game from Rodgers. Sometimes you allow the Packers to be able to run the ball pretty well. And Fields got sacked 4 times. Again, it could have been a really close game. They could have possibly came out with the upset here, but it ultimately didn't. And then played the Buccaneers. They just got destroyed this game. Fields 307. They really had no chance. Herbert did have 100 yards against the Bucks, which I didn't even realize. Looking back, probably a lot of garbage yards, but either way, Tom Brady played really well, and they ran the ball well. First quarter, jumped off to a 21-0 lead, and then it was kind of over at halftime, 35-3, and then there was no scoring really other than a field goal in the second half. Moving on from Bears' worst game of the year, they kind of got destroyed both sides of the ball in that game. And they play the 49ers. These are some good teams. You have to remember that they're playing. At least looking back at it, even looking at the time, like these teams they're not as good as. But they had a winning record 3-2 at one point in the season. Wasn't too bad. And look, Magnani, he had 2 playoff teams in his 4 years. And it's too bad. Losing years, I think he had 6 wins probably each. So I can't say I don't think he did a too bad job. I know he gets a bad rap, and I don't think he's that great as a play caller. But from a win-loss perspective, he didn't do a terrible job. So this game, Elijah Mitchell had a great game. Garoppolo 2 rushing touchdowns. Basically quarterback sneaks. At least the one was, I believe. There might have been another one where he just ran from 5 yards out. But either way, Fields, okay game. Didn't run the ball as well. Fields ran the ball. They actually, I don't know if these were scrambles or not. I can't really recall. Did fumble twice. Marquise Goodwin also fumbled, but none of them lost. But, they lose a game where 49ers ultimately scored 18 in the fourth quarter to win that game. So they were in that game. Played Pittsburgh. Team, again, another close game. Could have won, mostly a comeback. But found a way to come back. And, this is Fields' kind of first time rallying the team from behind by, being down a lot. You got Montgomery, I think, back for this game. And the Bears, for the most part, played pretty well. Big Ben played one of his better games of the year. And they slow down the run, which the Steelers don't have a great run game. But again, another team they could have possibly beat. This is a playoff team. If you look at the beginning of the schedule, other than the Browns and the Lions, they're all playoff teams before this bye week. And, they beat a playoff team here. Beat the Lions, and then they beat a team that went to the Super Bowl. So it's not looking that bad. And they play the Ravens. It's kind of an ugly game. This wasn't Lamar Jackson wasn't playing. But also, you could say the Bears had to start Andy Dalton. Well, they had to start, but he played, most of the second half. Early in the first half, too. And Huntley didn't play great in his first start, but did enough, and they ultimately kicked the late field goal, I believe. Well, they had the touchdown, but there was also a field goal in the fourth, 3:41. So 10 points. The Bears could have won that game as well, and the Ravens were hot this time. Then they play the Lions, a game they could have lost, honestly. They didn't play that great, but they ultimately defeat the Lions. And the Lions, I think, would win the game the next week. But Jared Goff played pretty well. Not high yard for attempts or completion, but did what they needed to. And, I know Dalton threw for 300 yards. He did have an interception, but Bears ultimately at least won the game. Didn't blow it. Then they play the Cardinals. Cardinals kind of got Hopkins and all that ready to go. Kyler Murray back, and Bears really didn't have much of a shot. Didn't get torched or walked off the field, but they competed. They just weren't as good as the Cardinals that day. And they play the Packers. For the first half, they were winning the game. 27-21. Mostly, it was from the Packers standpoint, mostly bad special teams. The Bears got a couple stops on defense, and offensively, they had some big plays. But it wasn't something you could say, wow, they're going to consistently do this for the entire game. And it didn't happen. I know obviously they had an interception here. The Packers got 7 off that from Rasul Douglas pick 6. But the second half, Packers dominated, they played good football, at least offensively, pretty much the whole game. Defensively, other than a couple big plays, which are hard to consistently do the entire game, Packers played decently well in all defense too, even though they gave up 30, mostly all in the first quarter, and 2 big passes and then a punt return, 97-yard punt return. So, again, Bears somewhat compete against the Packers again, and they just couldn't hold up. And then the Vikings game the following week, Vikings would win one of their last games of the year. They would be 8-9, but close game. Couldn't do much. Did get 6 later in the game. But it was a touch. It was, you know, the Bears really killed themselves with penalties and stuff. And I know their touchdown was very last second, so really they just scored three. But the Vikings gave them opportunities to win this game, and the Bears just penalties and not being disciplined. That was one of the games you could point to. Is like, yeah, they might need to go in a different direction coaching wise. Just team unraveled that game. Even though they did some play decent football, Nick Foles would play this game and played well enough, and they ultimately would beat Seattle. And that would be their fifth win of the year, winning by 1 point. Seattle's kind of blowing it. They just played conservative and allowed the Bears to ultimately pull off the victory. And they played the Giants, probably the best game of the year. I know the Giants are one of the worst offenses, especially at this point in the year. And basically, they controlled this game probably the first 7 minutes of the game. You could say, yeah, the Bears are going to win this game. It was 14-0. Giants eventually would get a field goal in the middle of the second, but that was it. Bears really did what they wanted to defensively. Got a loss. 24 yards. We got sacks of 30 total yards, negative yards in passing game for the Giants. This is kind of like the Browns game against the Bears, or vice versa. Now it's the Bears doing it to the Giants instead of the team doing it to them. Dan Montgomery 2 touchdowns. Didn't do great running the ball and really didn't do great passing the ball, but because the Giants defense played decent, this game is just Giants offense was horrible and Bears defense played really well. They played the Vikings last game, give them another victory. Those the last two wins for the Vikings were against the Bears. Looking back at it, and it was really these 21 points in the fourth, which was Justin Jefferson touchdown or KJ Osborne touchdown, and then a pick six by Patrick Peterson, the only one of the year for Patrick Peterson being interception wise, and that would be returned for a touchdown. Don't throw for a lot of yards, but 2 interceptions. Just Fields was hurt a lot this year, so he just needs to play different, and they need to obviously protect him better. So on both ways, that's kind of the Bears' season. I mean, if you can look at the passing stats, it's all over the place. Andy Dalton actually was 3-3 with his team. Nick Foles 1-0. Really, a lot of the loss was because it was when Justin Fields played. And, 10 interceptions, 7 touchdowns in his 10 games. So 1 pick a game, which isn't too bad for a rookie. And the passer ratings were in the low 70s for, bad offense. It's going to make your quarterback not look that great. And, Nick Foles is one game he played pretty well. They got 3. I mean, currently they got 3 guys that definitely are backups at least. Now the question is, Justin Fields, he's starter, and we're gonna have to see, this year, 2022, and going forward. I personally wasn't that high on him. Just it was mostly everything after he threw the ball, or everything after the snap. Just didn't love. Now he's athletic and. When he throws an accurate pass, he can, he has a good arm and can, do that. It's just not always great or always consistent. Obviously, we'll see probably more consistency this year, but so ultimately, that's the future of the Bears. It's all in Justin Fields. Otherwise, you're going to have to rebuild, restart again. But remember, Mitchell Trubisky's second year, they built the team around him and they went to the playoffs. So we'll see if the Bears can do that with Matt Eberflus as their head coach. And they do not have a first-round pick, so I'm not really going to talk about much here in terms of the draft because it's the Giants' pick. And they won't have another pick until, later in the draft, obviously. So that's all from this video. I appreciate you listening and watching, and have a nice day.